Welcome everybody to the start of a new Let's Play series of Warhammer 40,000 Gladius Relics of War. Yes, that is the full title of the game, and it is a fantastic game, by the way. It's a 4X game with no diplomacy, which is... Sometimes you're just in the mood to make units and fight stuff, and sometimes you want a more sort of well-rounded out experience. But if you're in the mood for just making units and destroying things, then this is the game for you. In the grim dark future of 40,000, there is nothing but war anyway, so it completely makes sense. So this is a 4X game. You will be settling cities, building units, sort of gobbling up resources, and then fighting everybody else and trying to dominate them. The only win condition is kill everybody off. There's no science victory, there's no diplomacy or allied victory. It's just be the only person or only team of people left alive on the planet. The story of the game is that there was I think it's a warp storm, and so everybody who was in orbit or on this planet is basically stuck here on Gladius during this storm, and the planet is filled with these relics, and that's why the game is called Gladius Relics of War. There's these really powerful relics. In fact, you can see one in the home screen here that this Space Marine is looking at, and they give you really cool Empire-wide bonuses, which are really cool. So Gladius, like a lot of Warhammer settings, is, for some inexplicable reason, home to all of the different factions in the Warhammer 40k universe. Well, I shouldn't say all, but they're being added in slowly, so you've at least got representation from almost all of them at this point, the major ones at least. I should probably point out that this will probably be an episode 0 with not a lot of any gameplay at all, just sort of like explaining how things work. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and go to new game, and we're going to take a look at all the different factions that are available at this point in the game. So we have the Astra Militarum, which is the Imperial Guard. Their initial challenge is hard, and this is because they have cheap but very fragile infantry, but they have extremely powerful tanks. So they have some, most units in this game are melee, range of 1 or 2, and a few range 3 units, but these guys have some artillery pieces that have a range of, I think it's 6. So they can be very strong. Once you get to that point in the game, you have a line of artillery in the back, supported by your Lehman Russ tanks in the front, with billions of infantry to plug the gaps and gobble up the resources as you go. The Imperial Guard are difficult to deal with late in the game, and not as powerful early. But they can build an Imperial Bastion, which is a really cool defensive building they can build that just kind of shoots. It's not super strong, but it's got a lot of health, and it does its job. Now, Chaos Space Marines. Obviously, this is just Chaos version of the Space Marines, which we'll talk about. Sorry to Warhammer fans, I don't mean to say they're just Space Marines that are Chaos instead. I know that's not true. But they're actually, in my opinion, the most vanilla race in this game. I think that the Chaos Space Marines give you the most rounded and regular experience in this game. And for that reason, I actually really like playing them, as they have a good balance of melee troops and ranged troops. They're tanky, they're not fragile, they have some really fun vehicles and really fun infantry. And they have some chaos boons they can give their units from like Nurgle and stuff that will boost your infantry and your vehicles and stuff. So this is a really fun faction to play, and they're very thematic, and their structures look so like gothic and just dangerous, like giant torture devices almost. So I quite like playing the Chaos Space Marines. We have the newest faction, the Craftworld Eldari, and the Craftworlds are like these giant ships that the Eldari live on, because they basically had this big war where they birthed a god accidentally, and now the remaining Eldari pretty much all live on these big ships. And they, in the game, their initial challenge is medium. I should mention that the Chaos Space Marines' initial challenge is medium, but I don't know, I think it's kind of easy, to be honest. The Eldar are a little harder because their ranged troops are, for the most part, only a range 1. So they have to get pretty close to use their range weapons, but they're actually very strong. In a lot of versions of Warhammer lore and in games, the Eldar are a little squishier than other units, but in this game they're not that squishy. They just have a short range, so they have good damage, they have pretty good survivability, but they have to get close. Even their basic unit, the Guardians, are like basically militia, and they're pretty strong, in my opinion at least. So they grow very slowly, their cities do, but they can call in reinforcements from their arcs, so they can have people coming down to the planet to live in the cities. They have webway gates, so if there's any Eldar players on the map, then there will be these neutral webway gates all over the map that are spawned randomly. And those gates can be claimed by an Eldar player spending a small amount of influence, which is one of the resources in the game, and that will allow you to teleport units between the webway gates at an influence cost. So for the Eldar, the influence can be quite important, because you have to be able to afford to send your units through these webway gates, and you have to control them, because unlike the other factions that can settle cities, the Eldar can only settle cities at webway gates, which are destructible. So if other factions destroy all the webway gates in the game, then you're stuck with your one city. So you have to be a little bit forward-thinking with how you're going to expand, and be willing to grab a webway gate, teleport troops through it, and get hold of that area, because you need to control these webway gates. So that's sort of it, and they have some really good infantry, and they have vehicles, but their vehicles are a little bit less tanky than some of the other factions, like the Imperial Guard or the Chaos Space Marines or the Space Marines. Vehicles are a little stronger, but the Eldar are fast. Their units have a huge movement range. They can move after they act, and they can be very mobile and do a lot of damage and then get out. The Necrons, the initial challenge is easy. I would definitely agree with that, because their units, all of their units, regenerate health every turn without having to rest. So they're just always like getting back up and going. They don't use the same resources that the other groups do. They don't use food, they use energy for more things. So they use energy for production, and then they use ore for upkeep. So that's basically because the Necrons are all sleeping in tombs under the planet, and they're waking up, so you need energy to sort of boost them up to wake them up. And that's how you sort of make units and buildings and stuff, is you're really just awakening things that were already there. The Necrons are kind of like galaxy cleansers, so they're sort of sleeping, and every once in a while they wake up and kill everything. But this time they came up against some powerful foes. And so all of their units are kind of slow, but they're strong and they regenerate. And they can only found cities on top of tombs. So if there's Necron players in the game, there will be these green, cracked energy-looking tiles, and that's where they have tombs buried underneath the surface, and they can only found new cities on those spots. So they're a little bit limited in where they can spawn their cities. You might get sort of bad spawns on those tombs, but there should be more than enough that you have some choice. And unlike the Eldar, their tombs can't be destroyed. They could be settled over top of, which is sometimes something I'll do, is if I find one, I might go settle a city on that area to block Necrons from spawning more cities around it. The Orcs, the fightiest boys in the galaxy, these guys are, I think their initial challenge is hard, because their boys, their Slug-a-Boy units they get at the beginning are terrible. They're so bad, and they just get beaten by anything that isn't basically Imperial Guardsmen. But so they have the WOG, so they, you know, the better their morale, the better they do. So as their morale goes down, their units fight worse, and then they get ore, and I think they get influence by killing things. I don't remember if they get influence. They definitely get ore, salvage ore, by killing units, because the Orcs are all about scrap and scrounging and repurposing. So you can see all their armor is like bits of tanks and Space Marines they've killed and whatever they can find. And they do have buffs that let their infantry sort of run quickly, and they regenerate pretty quickly. They heal faster outside of combat when they're resting than other groups, and they lose less morale when there's more infantry around. So they sort of form a big old mob, and when things are going well, they go even better for them, and when things are going poorly, they crumble, and the Orcs have trouble keeping their units together and their morale together, which is just like what they do in the lore. Is they're very fighty and they act very tough and aggressive, but if things aren't going their way, they will run. They do run away. Now the Space Marines is sort of your most vanilla sort of faction for 40k. I mean, there's always Space Marines in whatever you're doing, but in this game they play a little differently because they only get a single city. So they deploy a city from orbit from one of their huge fortresses, one of their big flying ship things, and they can only ever have that one city. So that city grows quickly and can expand easily, and I think they have less upkeep and stuff, but they can only ever have that one city. So their initial challenge is easy. I would say that's because you don't ever have to worry about founding another city, and your infantry are tough, because they're Space Marines. So in order to hold on to resources, they can't settle next to them, so they get these fortresses of redemption that are deployed from orbit they're okay. They're not very strong, but they have a lot of health, so they can sort of hold their own for a while. They do need supported. You can't plop one of those down and expect it to just hold an area by itself for very long, especially because units can't heal and shoot. Like, if they're shooting, then they're not resting. So if your fortress is busy attacking things, then any damage it's sustaining isn't being repaired until it gets a break. So you do have to support those a little bit. The Tau was introduced, I think, a couple DLCs ago. I think it was Eldari was most recent, and then Tau, and then Tyranids, and then Chaos Space Marines was the first one. That's right. So the Tau initial challenge is medium. They have a lot of long-range forces and they have really poor melee options, but a lot of their troops can summon drones, and I find the drones extremely helpful because you always have a unit you can spawn into existence and run off and scout, and it can shoot, and if it gets killed you don't care because it only lasts 3 turns anyway. So if you make good use of the drones, you can sort of get away with not losing very many real units, which is really, really good. And they deploy all of these cool battlesuit units. A lot of them are hovering, so they can kind of fly over the water and up and down like cliffs and stuff. They don't care about that. Really, really cool. And they can also use influence to sort of grab a couple of the types of neutral units that are already on the planet. Because in the lore they're allied with some of these units. They have sort of they're more like I'm going to use the word allied, but they can convert these units to their side, so you can get some extra troops that way just by spending some influence, which is really good because they're a little bit beefier and close range than the Tau are. So you have some options early game to block. Now late game they're not very good anymore, but removing an enemy and adding an ally with one ability is pretty strong. And then the Tyranids are your I shouldn't say this is sort of blasphemous, but this is like your Zerg faction. They're about numbers, and they're almost entirely melee. They have some ranged units, but they're short range for the most part. Even their cities have only a range of 2 on their attacks, which only a few other factions have. And then they don't use all the same resources that everybody else does either. They actually use biomass and food and ore replaced by biomass. So they use biomass, power, and influence, I think. Yes. So they can strip tiles down to bedrock and just sort of absorb all of the organic stuff. And then that tile is kind of useless after that. And they can reclaim buildings and they can use their buildings to reclaim units to get biomass and production if they ever need them. So if you have some useless cheap units later in the game that you don't want, just feed them back into your city and they'll use that material for something else. And a lot of the research of the Tyranid is about making units you already have better because of their propensity towards evolution. So it's really cool to build something like a Carnifex or something, and then there are several researches that you can get that add its claws are better, it's got a ranged weapon now, it penetrates armor better. It gets stronger and stronger as you go on, and you can kind of almost pick a unit you like in the mid tree of in the middle area of the research tree and just research the crap out of that unit until it's very strong. A little bit more so than the other factions where their early units fall off. Tyranid early-ish units can get stronger for a while, especially compared to other factions. These guys are really, really fun, but they have this instinctive behavior that holds them back, so a lot of their units they require a synapse creature, so creatures that are extending what's essentially like it's almost like a hive mind. So they're extending this hive mind control, and so when units are away from it for too long, they lose morale over time. And when units lose morale, they lose attack and they lose, so that they do less damage and they take more damage. So you want your synapse to be units to be near your other units all the time, or at least as often as possible, to keep that synapse going so that they keep their morale up. And as long as they're in synapse range, they can't lose morale at all. So abilities that would demoralize your units are ineffective against the Tyranid units that are currently under synapse control. So that's a really big limiter early game, is when you have start with all these little units that have no synapse control, so they run off to go explore like you would do with any other faction, and within a few turns you got to turn around and come home because their morale is dipped down to 0 and they're useless in combat. Now you can override that instinctive behavior with some influence, but you can't do that for the whole game or you're going to run out of influence. So it's a very interesting thing that they do. I should point out again that the Space Marines actually, they don't use food and ore, either they use requisition, because they're really not farming or mining, they're sending stuff in from orbit from their big ships. So they don't harvest that, but they do need power and influence. So that's how all these different factions work. I've got all the DLC as they've come out because honestly this game is so great. It's one of the few games that I buy the DLC right when it comes out. But obviously that's up to everybody, you know, if you're wanting to do that or not. The latest one to come out was the Craft World Eldari, so I think I'm going to play them. But, you know, by all means, if you guys want to see a particular faction at some point, just go ahead and say so in the comments and I'll think about it. I mean, really, I like playing all of them except for one, and I'm not going to tell you which one it is, because everybody will request that one. So we're going to go ahead and pick Craft World Eldari for this playthrough. Now, I'm on a large world size, 6 players. Let's do medium. We'll make it a little bit smaller, and then we're going to cut out some of these people. Oops. I was doing a 3v3v3, so let me put everybody on no team real quick. Okay, we'll put everybody on average. The reason I want to do this is because they get loyalty and level advantages at stronger, and the AI already kind of, I don't want to say they cheat, but you know how AI can't really be as smart as a person, so they have to give them little advantages. If I put them on, say, strong or very strong, they will be popping out units that they should not have yet, because I don't know if it's the loyalty bonus giving them enough of an edge in research and production that they're doing that so quickly, but I've noticed that if I put them on, like one time I was playing a game, I abandoned it because it wasn't fun anymore. It was me and one other AI on a team against one very strong opponent. That AI was beating us, the two of us, and we weren't even surrounded or in a bad spot. We had plenty of cities and production and stuff. That AI was just popping out late game units, and I was working on my middle game units. It was difficult. So I'm going to leave them on average. So then the difficulty of the AI advantages, we're going to leave that on medium, world size medium. Now I like to do landmass low because there's very little water in this game. So if you don't put it on low or very low, there's almost no choke points of any kind in the map. It'll just be sort of one large landmass with small pockets of water, like ponds or lakes basically. And I want there to be a little bit more variation in the landscape. So we're going to keep that on low. Game pace on standard. And then in advanced, there's all these cool options you can do. And I'll show you what some of these are and some of the ones I like using. So I've got some DLCs in here. Assault Pack, which adds some units to each faction. Fortification Pack, which adds constructions to each of the factions. Reinforcement Pack, which also added units. I don't remember. And then Lord of Skulls, which adds how do I describe this thing? It's an enormous, like, factory-sized robot that spawns and annihilates everything, and it's hard to kill, but if you do kill it, you get a faction-wide buff for the whole game. But it is a freaking boss of a unit, so I really don't want to turn that on because it's just kind of, it shows up and just messes everything up. And I'm going to leave the quests off because there are quests that help you sort of, with each race, that sort of helps you, they nudge you along in sort of the direction you should be thinking about going with your faction, like getting heroes and buying certain units and expanding to certain ways and stuff like that. I'm going to leave that off because I want to do it the way I want to. So then there's all these options here, like wildlife density, artifact density. I like to turn that up a little bit. I find that without this up higher, there aren't that many artifacts, especially once I turn the landmass level down. Special resource density, I turn this up high. Again, I find the medium is too low, and it feels like when it's too low, you're not settling where you could grab resources, as opposed to you're just settling where the ground underneath it is better. And I like it to be a little bit more about these special resources, fighting over these back and forth, and your units heal on these better than they heal on regular tiles. So I like having these sort of points where armies are fighting over these in order to have an advantage. So then here's some of the specific sort of special resources you can find. I just have these all on medium. There's all these different kinds of ones. And then now here you can see, you know, do you want more or less forests? Do you want more or less rivers? And you've got all of these different ones that you can turn up or down or turn them off if you don't like them. Now, region size, what this does, and it's a little frustrating that these tooltips don't really show you what they do, but you have to kind of play with it a little bit to figure it out, or you can look it up. But region size, as far as I can tell, means that if you had this on very large, that would mean that when the planet is being generated, when the map is being generated for the game, let's say the game is generating a desert, it would make that desert a very, very large part of the map would be desert. And then next to it would be maybe, say, a very, very large bit of Arctic. And then next to that would be a very, very large forest. And that's all fine, but what happens is, and I find this happens even on medium, in my opinion, is that you're stuck with your faction settling cities in only one or two types of regions because the regions are so big that you may be, you know, if you've got forest where you spawn, there may be forest in like a fifth of the map, and you're just stuck in forest the whole game, so you only have access to, say, a boost in your food and production, and you're not going to find good ore or power or research or influence or anything like that. So I like to turn this down so that there's smaller nodes of biomes near each other, so that you can kind of get more of a variety. Maybe I'll turn this up to medium, or small, so it's a little bit more work to find the stuff you want, but I do like having smaller region sizes. And then, yeah, you've got your world seeds, so you can just randomize that and get whatever you want. And so that's all the options. So I'm going to go ahead and leave this on random, because I don't like to know who my opponents are. Now, I'm a little colorblind here, so we're going to make this something a little easier for me to see. I don't know what color that is. Black? That's interesting. We'll go with this dark color here. And I always like to be yellow, because yellow is my favorite color. So we'll go ahead and get started. I'm going to go ahead and skip the intro. If you want to see any of those, every faction has one. You can go ahead and you can look them up on YouTube, or you can watch them yourself at some point. So we've spawned in, so let me quickly talk about what we're looking at here. One really important thing, and the game doesn't, I don't think the game teaches you this. If you hit Control-Z, it brings up the tile yields for each tile in the game. This is extremely helpful for expanding. As the Eldari, you start with a city, because again, you can only use these webway gates. But any other faction, you'll be making your city where you want to, your first one, and then subsequent ones. So what you want to do is you hit Control-Z so you can see, you know, oh, if my city has, say, this tile in its borders, it'll make plus 40% ore on any structure on this tile. So this is going to be a good ore spot. And like, you can look around and see, oh, you know, I've got really bad food generation here. So I can tell that with this playthrough, with the Eldar, I'm going to be focusing on vehicles, it looks like, because I'm going to have really bad food upkeep increases here. So it looks like I'm going to be doing an ore playthrough here based on what I'm seeing. So I'm going to start my research by going into vehicles, and I'm probably going to not build much infantry at all. So what we have here is we have some abilities up here. So whatever sort of global abilities your faction has are up here. So this is where I can activate webway gates. Now, I don't want to do that yet, because these webway gates will not be attacked by neutral units. They'll only be attacked by the other players. So I don't want to activate these until I'm ready to use them. or I'm just going to risk them getting destroyed. And once they're destroyed, again, I can't build anymore. There are no ways to get more cities if I lose these webway gates, so I'll have to be careful. So for resources in the game, we have our food. This is used as upkeep for units. It's used as a cost to build units, and it's used to house your population. So my city right now has 1 population, so that's using 1 food. I have ore. This is used as an upkeep for most vehicles, and buildings and vehicles generally require ore to build. Power is most commonly an upkeep for a structure. So say this one that builds my buildings is an upkeep of 3 power. And some vehicles will have a power upkeep. Research just increases how fast you research things. And influence is an upkeep for tiles. So as your city expands by taking tiles around it, which you control which ones it takes, then that has an influence upkeep. And then heroes have an influence upkeep. And you also spend influence on some things like buying heroes. And there's also there's a special resource tile somewhere. They'll spawn randomly in the game called I think it's, I don't want to say it out loud because I don't remember how to say it perfectly, but it's an encampment that's basically a shop. You can send a hero there and they can buy items to make them stronger, like do more damage or have more health, or get like one-time use items like a grenade or a bola or something like that. So that's what the resources do. So now in our city, you can see this is what the city is producing of all those things. The only thing you're seeing here that you don't see up here as resource is loyalty. This is city specific. And as the loyalty is higher, you get 1% extra output of resources. And when your loyalty is negative, you get a 2% decrease. So having positive loyalty isn't very valuable, but having negative loyalty starts to hurt. So you don't want to go into the negative if you can help it, at least not too far. I would say somewhere around negative 8 to 10, you're going to start really feeling it, because that's almost, it could be up to 20% decrease in production, and that's tough on all your resources. It limits everything you get. So then the Bone Singer's Chantry, every faction has a different name for this structure, but this is your structure that makes buildings. So essentially, I can make all these different things. So I've got this Isha's Gardens that produces food. I have an Alt Marl of Vol, that produces ore. I have a thermoplasma generator to make energy. I have a spirit ossuary to make research. I have a dome of the seers to generate influence. And I have the Assyrian's Crucible to produce infantry. So as you can see, I start with a couple infantry, but I actually cannot produce more. There's nothing here I can make other than buildings. So I'll want to get something soon. I may just skip the infantry building altogether for this part of the game, because I'm not going to have a lot of food. And like I mentioned, as my population grows, which it does slowly over time, and I can hold up to 6 right now, these guys will eat up food. So you can see I'm only making +3, so I don't really want to build infantry or grow too quickly until I can get a food building. So I could build one, say, here, and I wouldn't lose too much, but I don't really want to be building them in these spots where I'm going to lose efficiency, because that just really hurts. These special nodes around here you're seeing, now I own this one because my city is next to it. It's giving me, so let me show you what these mean. The little hexagon that's split into 3 with a 0 next to it, that indicates that there are 0 spots for building structures on this tile. That's because there's a special resource here, recaf leaf. So the recaf leaf takes up the whole tile, so I can't put anything there if I put it in my city. This is worth 1 food and 1 influence per turn, which you can see up here. +6 from buildings, which is coming from my city, plus 0.3 from loyalty, because my city's loyalty is high, so I'm getting a bonus percentage, and +1 from features. This is what they mean by features. Same with food, +1 from features, plus 0.4 from features. I'm not sure why I'm only getting plus 0.4. Unclear on that. But you can see it's got a plus 20% loyalty bonus. Now what that does is I have to incorporate that into my city's borders for me to get that bonus. So if I take a unit, say these Eldar Guardians here, and I run them over here onto this fermentation pool, I will add +2 food per turn to my empire. So they've grabbed this, and now I should go up. I didn't go up. May not update until I pass turn. And then yeah, so you want to grab those resources with these guys because they will add some really nice buffs to your empire. And I'm pretty sure that'll update when I pass turn. The Eldar can attack and then move, or move and then attack. Everybody else's units can attack and then they can't move after that. The other thing you need to know is I can't take my Eldar unit and move a little bit, and then a little bit more, and then a little bit more. The developers actually mentioned that the reason they did that is because they used to have it that way, like a lot of 4Xs do, where you can kind of like inchy squinch your units along and just kind of check out the fog of war. But they said people were being very, very slow about taking their turns because everyone's trying to optimize it, and they wanted to make sure that when you move somewhere, there was a consequence to that. So you have to think about who's going to forge ahead into the darkness and see what's there. So I kind of like that. You get used to it, but it hurts at first when you make the mistake of running over somewhere and there's enemies all over and you can't get away now. So over here are all the notifications for stuff we've discovered. They just give you a little bit of information for what the resource does. I don't really ever check these anymore. They'll show you that for enemy units and stuff as well. And then so what it wants me to do is order my city to do something. So what I'll probably do is, you can see in order to acquire a tile, I need 5 ore and 5 influence and 12 production. So this chantry produces 7 production, so that means it'll take me 2 turns to acquire a tile. So I'll probably start with this one because I'm going to want to build a food. Oh, it updated. It's +5 now. Okay, yeah, I don't know why that didn't update right away, but there it is. So anyway, so I want to grab this tile. Your city will grow in population over time, but it will not grow in tiles. You have to claim those for yourself. At first, you can only acquire tiles immediately adjacent to the city center. Eventually, you can get research down the line that will give you the ability to grab stuff 1 hex further away, and then finally 3 hexes away, so you can get a big area. And that's not true for all factions, FYI. Like the Tyranids can only ever go 2 away, but they get a bonus to multiple cities that other factions, when you found multiple cities, you get a loyalty hit, so it's kind of, you have to be ready to settle. You can't just city spam or you'll actually mess up all your cities. The Tyranids get less of that penalty. They're encouraged to have lots of smaller cities. So what I want to do is grab this tile so I can have some space for building, because right now I have only 1 spot and it's right here. And this place would be good for production and for ore, so what I'll probably plop down here is my vehicle making building once I've researched it. So I want to make a food building over here, and the reason I want to do that is because, again, every time I grow it's going to chew up 1 food, and I don't want to run out of food. And I'll also want to start building ore somewhere as well. So for research, we've got a pretty long tree. You can see in the beginning you need 2 researches in a tier to get the next tier unlocked. So if I research these 2, I can start in here. If I research, say, 4 in here, it does not unlock tier 3. You have to get 2 in this tier to get this tier, and 2 in this tier to get the next tier, etc. So going back to get earlier researches is still helpful, but you won't progress down the tree to the more powerful things. And every time you research something, the cost of the next research goes up a little bit. So you have to be careful. You're not going to be researching everything in this game unless you're playing an extremely long game. So I'm going to go ahead and start off with the Assyrian Summons. Nope. Greater Ingress, building that produces ground vehicles, and it harvests a small amount of ore and research as well. So we're going to start with that. So now we're ready to end turn, so I think we'll call this episode done. So this has been episode 0, where I've sort of talked about setting up a game and the different factions and sort of what everything means in the game. And so I'll join me in the next episode, and we will start conquering, and I'll still talk about stuff a little bit as we go, but we can start exploring and building up and stuff in the next episode. So thank you for joining, and I will see you then.